This is part 2 of our Dewey-ing history study on Native American policies. We're going to start with the arguments for and against policies impacting Native Americans. Section 1's guiding question: why do some people believe preserving Native American culture should be the goal of government policies? To help us with that, we're going to read this letter from officers of the Zuni Pueblo tribe in a letter to New Mexico's congressional representatives. In their letter, they said, "We, the undersigned officers of the Zuni Pueblo, earnestly request the assistance of all congressmen interested in the welfare of the Indians in support of the Wheeler-Howard bill. At mass meetings, the Zuni Indians unanimously approved it. We have been a self-governing people for many generations under this bill, and will not only continue to be self-governing, but will have more power. This bill is for the best interests of our people." Best interests of our people. If it is something that is supported by the indigenous peoples, would it make sense for non-indigenous people to support it? Should we do the things for a group of people if that group of people aren't supporting of it? Under the Wheeler-Howard bill, we are protected against the allotment system. Law and Order section meets our entire approval, giving us needed protection from outside influences, and is one of the most important features of this bill. Needed protection from outside influences. What are they trying to protect? Remember that the bill protects Native American land. It gives them money to help start businesses to support themselves. It helps them get money for technological education, those kinds of things. How is this a reason for supporting Native Americans? Why do we want to help protect them from outside influences? We wish to express our appreciation for any efforts made in our behalf in your support of the Wheeler-Howard bill. What do we focus on as being most important? Is it the idea that they're the ones who want it? Is it the idea that it will protect them from outside influences? Will it help preserve their culture? How might this be related to today's debate over the Indian Child Welfare Act? What are they trying to preserve by making sure Native American children get adopted by Native American families? If in the past people were concerned about preserving Native American culture, Native American communities, is that similar to today's debate? Let's look at this visual to help us understand this idea. In 1934, a picture was taken of John Collier with 5 chiefs of South Dakota's Blackfoot tribe while meeting to discuss Native American tribal self-government. John Collier, this is the man who pushed for the Indian Reorganization Act. He's taking a picture with these chiefs. How are these chiefs dressed? Is this traditional headdresses, traditional garb? Why do we think the chiefs are dressed in this traditional way? Is it because they're proud of their culture, proud of who they are? Is that a reason why we should protect Native peoples? Because they're proud of who they are? If we don't protect their cultures, what will happen to their cultures? Will they lose a culture that they are proud of? Is that similar to today's debate? Think back to the woman who was interviewed in the article who had been adopted by Native families. She was proud of who she was. If she hadn't been adopted by those Native families, she might not have had that connection with her culture. Consider that. Supporting question number 2, We're asking, why do some people believe assimilation of Native Americans should be the goal of government policy? And you remember that assimilation, we defined that term in the very first part. It's forcing somebody to change from one culture or society to another. So the question here is, why do some people think we should force Native Americans to change their culture? A member of the Navajo Council named J.C. Morgan gave a speech to the Navajo Indian Council at Crown Point on April 10, 1934, in which he said, "Mr. Chairman, I am going to speak on the Wheeler-Howard bill just as I see it myself. This bill tends to isolate our Navajo people upon a reservation. The bill urges segregation of our Indian people. Why don't they segregate all Japanese and all Chinamen by themselves somewhere? These people are foreigners and yet are living in all parts of the United States, doing what they will under the Constitution of our country." Why does he not want Native Americans only surrounded by Native Americans? We, the Indians, here before any of the ancestors of Commissioner Collier ever came to this land. Therefore, we, the Indians, are the first Americans and by all rights are free citizens of our land. No one has any right to construct a fence around our Indians. He doesn't want all the natives, I guess, being fenced in. He doesn't like the idea of them being segregated. Personally, I want my children to have the same rights and privileges in school as any child of the white citizen. The Wheeler-Howard bill urges Indian self-rule when they are not ready for such step. Let me finish reading the amendment to the Constitution. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Why should I assent such a bill that tends to deny me my property? If I build a home on a piece of land, I naturally would want my property to go to my children. But the Wheeler-Howard bill says the property belongs to the tribe. I therefore object to this bill because it is unconstitutional. So why did this group of natives not like the idea of the Indian Reorganization Act? These ideas about segregation, the idea of being separate. Why do they not want to be isolated from all the rest of the parts of the United States? Are they saying that what's more important to them is to become part of the United States than to preserve their culture? It says it's the idea that he was in favor of the private property that was part of assimilation. He doesn't want the land to be owned by the tribe. He wants the land to be owned by him so he can pass it down to his children. So what do we learn about why some people think we should focus on assimilation? Is it because they think the opportunities outside of the reservation are better? They don't want to be, I think stuck would be the wrong word, but they don't want to be forced to stay on the reservation, to be forced to live in a, quote, segregated community. How might this be related to today's debate over the Indian Child Welfare Act? If we only allow those children to be adopted by Native families, are we segregating the Native peoples? Are we keeping them separate from everyone else? Is it possible that people would oppose it for that reason? And our next document here is a image from Frank Leslie's illustrated newspaper titled "Educating the Indians. A female pupil of the government school at Carlisle visits her home at Pine Ridge Agency." So this girl, much like the picture of the boys at the very top, had been taken from the reservation, had gone to the boarding school, and is visiting back home now. How is she dressed? How does she look? She appears to be happy. She's dressed differently, and all the native people seem to be treating her as a curiosity. But does it seem like she's fine with the change? Does she seem to be upset about not being dressed the same as the rest of them, or does she seem to be proud of her new self? What's the main idea here? And why might that be similar to ideas today's debate over the Indian Child Welfare Act? Those parents who wanted to adopt that boy, they think it's what's best for him to be adopted by them. So some people are okay with not preserving the native culture because they think it's what's best for the child. Was this what was best for this girl in the past? Do some people think similar things today? I suppose they must. It's time for our step 2C, choices and consequences. What did they decide to do? In 1934, Congress passed an amended version of the bill and is known as the Indian Reorganization Act, also called the Wheeler-Howard Act, and is part of what became known as the Indian, quote, New Deal. The act slowed the practice of allotting communal tribal lands to individual tribal members. It did not, however, take the individual natives' land that had been allotted to them. As a result, many reservations turned into checkerboards, where there was some land held by the tribe and other parts held by individuals. So why do we think the bill was passed? I had shown you the maps that showed what was happening to Native American lands. Do you think that that would be a great cause for concern? John Collier had traveled to the tribal lands and saw them getting diminished and saw the conditions on the tribal lands. The communities were impoverished, and he thought something needed to be done to help the Native Americans. He didn't think the answer was getting rid of their culture like had been the policy under assimilation. The act slowed the practice of allotting communal tribal lands. In total, more than 2 million acres of land were returned to various tribes in the first 20 years after passage. Section 18 required each tribe to vote for or against having the act apply to them. In the end, 172 tribes had accepted the act, and 73 had rejected it. The act has been challenged in court many times, mainly because the land that is turned over to the tribe is exempt from certain state laws and taxes. Businesses such as casinos are frequently built upon these pieces of land. The legacy of the act is mixed. While it had good intentions and did preserve great amounts of Native American lands, it was still another government program created for natives without much input from natives. So, a consequence, it did preserve much Native American land. However, it was still designed by United States ethnocentric, Eurocentric beliefs. We didn't ask the natives what they wanted. Many think forcing a structured American government on the tribe was worse than allowing them to keep their traditional governments. Again, as we said before, these cultures had governments just in their unique ways, their traditional ways, for hundreds and hundreds of years. Why do we need to force them to change to a more American government? While the Indian Reorganization Act helped protect the reservations and preserve Native American cultures, today close to 30% of people living on reservations live in poverty. And it doesn't say it on this page, but there is a current social issues, the great tragedy of the coronavirus, in addition, is hitting especially hard on reservations, because not only is poverty a problem there, healthcare is a problem there. So in our comparing and contrasting of the two debates, the similarity of the two debates, we're both talking about Native Americans, right? Are there other similarities we're talking about? Is it the preservation of Native American culture, acting to protect Native Americans, Native American peoples? What were we trying to protect in the past? Were we protecting their land? Were we allowing them to govern themselves? That's how we were protecting Native cultures in the past. What's the attempt to protect Native cultures today? What are they doing? What are they doing related to adoptions? Who should Native American children be adopted by? Is the Indian Child Welfare Act an idea there? All right, so the real question here is, should we support or oppose the Indian Child Welfare Act? Based on the evidence from the past, should we be acting to preserve Native American culture? Is what's in the best interest of the Native Americans to retain their culture as Native Americans? Or do some people believe assimilation is what's best for them? If you have questions, please ask me. Good luck.